Hello everyone, how's it going? My name is Ellias, and in today's video I'll be talking about all the books I have recently read. So it has been a couple of months since my last wrap up. In this video I'll be talking about 8 to 9 books total. Also, this will be my last video here in this apartment in SF before I move to LA, which is pretty exciting. Kind of stressed out with all the things that are coming and going. Crossing my fingers that hopefully everything will run smoothly, you know, but who knows? So that sort of explains all the mess behind me, because I got rid of like 300 books the other day, and it was just, oh my god, the feeling, you know, the feeling that you get when you buy a book that you really want to read, either an anticipated read or a book you've heard a lot of good things about, right? But there's also another feeling of getting rid of books that you just either didn't like or you DNF'd it, whatever the reason is. That feeling is pretty much on par as the former. So huge weight off my chest just in the fact that I don't have to pack as many books as I would have moving and stuff. So huge sigh of relief. I will be eventually doing a bookshelf tour eventually. But it would be a very long time until I will have a whole wall of books again, because this is the first apartment where I had enough room where I can put all my books in one space, in one spot, where it could all fit accordingly. But in the new apartment, it is structured sort of differently. Before we get further into the video, I'd like to thank today's video sponsor. Thank you to Book of the Month for sponsoring today's video. You guys already know I love working with Book of the Month. They are avid supporters of this channel, and I've been working with them pretty much every month for the past year or so. They're great, love them. Basically, how it works is that Book of the Month comes through hundreds of books every month so that you can spend more time reading and less time researching. You know, it's great. They're all newly released titles, and they're all hardback. You can choose one or more books for that selection for that particular month with your first hardcover newly released book for only $9.99. So let's go ahead and take a look at this month's selections. So first up, we have Truebiz, which is really interesting because this is a literary fiction about the school for the deaf. So I actually learned ASL back in high school for like a year, and I kind of wish I kept up with it now. So next up, we have my pick for the month, and this is KK by Vaishnavi Patel. This is sort of a fantasy retelling from the perspective of KK, a princess who is basically forced into an arranged marriage, and how she strives to fight the patriarchy and for her place in history. I've also seen and heard a great deal about this book, especially from Janine from The Story Ain't Over, so pretty excited to dive into this. Next up, we have a historical fiction, The Good Left Undone, which follows a family set in Italy during World War II. Next up, we have nonfiction Bittersweet, How Sorrow and Longing Make Us Whole Again. Last but not least, we have a thriller, Like a Sister. This one follows two estranged sisters, and when one of them ends up dying from an apparent overdose, the other one isn't entirely convinced. And so she goes down this dark, twisted path and tries to find out and uncover the mysterious circumstances regarding her half-sister's death. Alright folks, and there you have it. Those are all the April picks for this month. You can use my code Ellias to get your first book for only $9.99. Thank you once again to Book of the Month for sponsoring today's video, and now back to your regular broadcast. Alright, so with that being said, let's go ahead and get straight into the books. Alright, so starting off, I just want to briefly talk about this trilogy that I actually made a whole dedicated video on that you guys can check out. It's the Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb. I think in my last wrap-up, I only talked about the first book, Assassin's Apprentice, and the other two books. Listen, the whirlwind of emotions, the rollercoaster ride that I went on, reading about these well-crafted characters, the way Robin Hobb writes these flawed human characters, it is just literally nothing I've ever read before. I would highly encourage and definitely recommend this fantasy trilogy if you're looking for a new fantasy series to binge, or if you're actually new to the fantasy genre, because I think the series is just perfect for that. But you can go ahead and check out the dedicated video that I made for this trilogy. Just be aware that the video also includes spoilers and non-spoilers as well. So speaking of Robin Hobb, I actually went ahead and purchased the next set of trilogy set in the same universe, and this is Ship of Magic, also by Robin Hobb. Honestly, I'm not gonna lie, this book took me a while to get through. I was initially skeptical, hesitant at first, because I was like, maybe I should skip this certain trilogy, because this trilogy features a whole set of new characters, set in a different part of the world. It sort of introduces a whole new different magic system. And so I was like, maybe I should skip the Live Trade trilogy and continue Fitz's story where it left off. But so many of you guys were like, don't skip it, it's great, it's fantastic, it's a great addition to the series, and some of these characters in this trilogy will appear later on in the books, and also will spoil the events that happen. So I was like, fine, I read it, and let me tell you, I was just low-key disappointed with this one, just a little bit, because there were so many things in here that I didn't like. Granted, they were very little and minuscule, you know, like the characters, and sort of where the story went, and some of the character choices that were made. listen, maybe it's all on purpose. Maybe there's a direction in which Robin Hobb set to write some of these characters the way that they are, because who knows, later on, you know, because of character developments, I could fucking love them later on in the next book, because most of these characters, if not all, were just so borderline irritating to read. Like, there were so many instances where I couldn't agree with the choices that were made. Basically, bottom line, all of these characters are pretty much unlikable. I'm here for unlikable characters. I'm here for great, flawed characters, right? But if there isn't like a single character that I could prominently root for, it's pretty hard for me in my case to stay rooted within the story, within the world itself. However, outside of these characters, the whole world, the magic system itself, I mean, kept me going, literally, and the writing too. They were the main driving force that helped me plow through this, what, 800-page book or something like that? So almost 900 pages at that, but this was a beast to get through. I mean, the world building in of itself is just so impressive. Like, Robin Hobb, she just has so much talent. Like, I never cared really much about world building before in my books, but after reading 4 books from this author, I'm just like, give me more, I want it all. This series primarily follows a family in which they own a live ship, and how this live ship comes to life is that within this family, 3 generational family members have to die in order for the ship to come to life. Because this strange ship is made out of this really weird, strange wood that comes up north, and it's really rare, and they have like this whole secret agreement with the people that live in these woods, that they're sort of privy, the only ones who can get it. Like, the agreement, the price that they have to pay is pretty steep, and it lasts for generations. And so we're following this one family as well as 2 other distinct POVs. We're following like sea serpents, we're following a young captain, and so altogether we're following, I believe, like 5 distinct main POVs in this book. There were a lot of characters going on and involved, and that was just something different from Farseer, because in Farseer, we're reading from first person, only from Fitz's POV. This one, it's third person, reading from a multitude of different people. And creatures too at that. And so the whole story in of itself, the premise was really interesting, because this young pirate that we're also reading from is trying to steal a live ship of his own, and how that all comes to play within this almost 900-page book. It is just truly a well-crafted story with unlikable characters. I'm just praying and hoping that within this next book, some of these characters will undergo through some transformative character change, because if not, I will literally scream. Okay, this is one POV in here. We're reading from a POV of this 12-year-old girl named Malta. She was literally the brattiest, selfish, promiscuous 12-year-old girl I've ever read in my entire life. I wanted to spank her. Her mom and her grandma. There were so many character choices in here that I had to question, because they were so out of character for a lot of these characters, you know? The grandmother and the mother, they're both steadfast, really strong women, but yet they bend to the whims of this little child, this girl. I was just like, you're seriously gonna let her get away with that? Like, the way she talks back to them, I was just like, the inner Asian in me could never. I'm just really hoping that in the next book, something really bad happens to this child. I'm sensing that she's gonna get somewhat of a huge character development change. But you know what? Reading it currently, I was like, fuck, somebody call child services, because you know what, we're just gonna leave it at that, okay? But in the end, I gave this one a 3.75 out of 5 stars. You know, not overall a bad rating, just overall a tad disappointing, but I am looking forward to reading her other books. So there's that. All right, so next up, I read Frankystein by Mary Shelley. All right, so this was a classic that I have actually read, but the abridged version. Do you guys remember the children's illustrated classics? The books that were sort of the shortened, condensed version of just basically every book that I thought was out there, you know, all the classics, and they had like pictures in them and everything. So I read the abridged version of Frankenstein, and I sort of had an overall idea of what the story is about. Like, I'm pretty sure everyone knows the general story of Frankenstein, right? And so I wasn't expecting much going into this one. However, this one took me completely by surprise. I absolutely loved it. I adored the story, and I was really here for the atmosphere. Like, it was so dark and gloomy and sad. I did know the story. I know it was going to be sad, but the writing really evokes sort of like a sense of doom. I can't really quite put my finger on it, but Mary Shelley, the author, she was like 19, 20 when she first wrote this book, and that in itself, fucking impressive. And this book altogether, less than 300 pages, held my attention throughout. I forgot so many things that happens in the abridged version, and the abridged version is like the abridged version. It's shorter, there's not a lot of details. It's not the same as reading the full story. Sure, it was fun back when I was younger. I thought it was like a really great, fun way of telling a story, you know, sort of like a Sparks Notes version, but I'm really glad that I read this. I actually haven't read a lot of monster books, and the monster in this book, you know, plays into question who actually is the monster here. Because let me tell you, it ain't Frankie, okay? Because beauty is in the eye of the beholder, okay? Like, I'm pretty sure if Frankie were to exist now, he would be a model, right? Or a bodybuilder of some kind, right? Playing sports, you know, in the fashion industry. Like, you never know. I could change him, who knows? So really loved it, one of the best classics I've ever read, and we actually read this for the Late Night Book Club where we also did the live show, so you can check that out as well. Alright, so speaking of the Late Night Book Club, the next book that I read was Loveless by Alice Oseman. So for this one, I think I gave this a 2 out of 5 stars. Was it a 3 or 2? I don't know, either one of those. To me, this story was okay. I thought it was pretty mediocre in terms of sort of like a coming of age story. It was fairly predictable. There wasn't a lot of substance in terms of things that were actually happening. I thought it was a lot longer than it needed to be. I know that this book is really important for a lot of other people in terms of the asexual representation. So I'm not asexual, so I can't speak for the representation. I'm not talking about the representation here though. I'm mainly talking about the story that involves around these characters. The characters, on the other hand, were really flat. I found the majority of like their conversations or dialogue to be so forced. I felt like the topics, the things that they wanted to say, weren't really as nuanced as I would have liked them for it to be. I would have liked that nuance, you know, that conversation that goes deeper within sort of the broad definition of what asexual or just the other umbrella terms that this book does briefly mention as well. I feel like this book would be really great, really educational and informative for someone who's also probably going through the same problems that the main character is going through as well. I just personally thought it wasn't as good as I thought it would be. Like the writing in here, featuring some of these characters going through college, I felt was somewhat juvenile. I feel like the characters of color in this book were basically only used for educational purposes for the main character to find out more about herself and her sexuality and how she identifies and everything like that. But overall, just really tame, not too bad. Lacking some nuance and just really juvenile to me overall. So. Right, so the next book that I read is Memorial by Bryan Washington. So this one is really short, really interesting. It follows this gay couple, one is black and one is Japanese, with the former being HIV positive. And so we're following past the peak of the relationship where both of them are just really comfortable with each other, sort of figuring out if they're still in love with each other and if they want to call off, you know, the relationship. However, in the midst of this, one of the characters has to go back to Japan because his father is dying, and so his mother from Japan comes back to America and sort of becomes a temporary roommate with the other character. Their banter, their interaction with each other was just the highlight for me in this book. It was just really funny, really cute and wholesome to read about. I think overall this was a really solid read. There wasn't anything really substantial much about it in of itself. I feel like slice of life books really have to rely heavily on characterization and writing, but I feel like as far as story goes, this was okay. This was like an okay read in general. There were some aspects that I really liked about it, you know, reading about a realistic take on a couple's life, you know, how it isn't perfect, and that felt really real and human to me. And reading about someone who is HIV positive was also a really interesting angle as well. So yeah, I do overall think this was a solid read, and I am looking forward to reading other books by Bryan Washington as well. Next up, I read Crowbones by Anne Bishop. So if you guys didn't know, Anne Bishop is one of my favorites, go-to for urban paranormal fantasies, and most of her books, to me, are comfort reads. I basically reread her books like pretty much every year at this point. This is, I believe, the 8th book in this series that she has created. Just to give you some backstory on what this whole series is about, it primarily follows a bunch of supernatural creatures, you know, werewolves, vampires, and a bunch of other shapeshifters like crows, coyotes, bears, basically every animal on the planet, as well as like different elemental spirits for like the seasons. It was really interesting reading about these supernatural creatures in this whole world that she's created because to me, the way she creates these creatures and their lore behind it feels like you're reading about them for the first time, which I thought was just really cool, really refreshing to read about. And so predominantly, this whole series begs the question of what if humans were not the top of the food chain? If we had been created and came after these supernatural creatures had already existed in the first place. So there are a lot of like supernatural and human politics involved, and just how all that plays out, because literally all the antagonists in this whole series are all humans. Also, this series has the most slowest burn romance I've ever read in my entire life. I don't think I've ever read a series where it takes 5 freaking books for two characters to make out. Not even make out, a chaste kiss on the lips. Like honestly, it was kind of insane, but not gonna lie, a lot of fun. Like they hold hands in like book 3 or something. You're just like, fucking yes, finally, you know, shining from the rooftops and everything. So it's a lot of fun. Crowbones is sort of like the 8th book in the series and sort of like a spin-off, and it primarily follows a different cast of characters revolving around this innkeeper and this sort of like motel or inn that she has renovated for humans and others alike. And so on Halloween night, there's a prank involving humans and the others, which is another name given to these supernatural creatures. And so some others and humans are killed and the whole town is like cut off from like the rest of the world until basically everyone figures out who exactly the perpetrator is in this book. So I thought it was really fun, really nice revisit back to the whole world, and I'm looking forward to reading what other stories that Anne Bishop has to craft and offer. And so nothing less than 4 out of 5 stars. Alright folks, so we have come down to our last and final book in this video, and this is House of Breath and Sky by Sarah J. Maas. Oh fucking boy. Alright, so off the bat, giving this book 3 out of 5 stars. Its literal only saving grace was the last 30 pages or so of this book. Did this book need to be 800 pages long? It absolutely did not. It was way longer than it needed to be. There was just so many things that I was just so annoyed by with this book regarding the writing and the characters. Let me get comfortable because there are some things that need to be discussed. So Maas by now has written like 15 books or so, okay? I gotta say, with each book, you know, she has progressively gotten better with like less repetition, you know, whatnot and everything. However, I have to say that this was her worst written book for me yet, because there were so many times in this book where I felt like I was reading the same thing over and over again, but in different phases and in different times of the book. And the dialogue, oh my god, don't even get me started, because I felt like this was the most awkward and cringe-worthy dialogue I've yet to read in any of Sarah J. Maas's books. Throughout the entirety of this read, I was questioning, how old are these characters? They're in like their mid to late 20s? Like some of them even older because they're like immortal, right? But they talk like they're fucking freshmen in high school. Their dialogue is so fucking cringe. It was so bad. It was so bad. It was like reality TV, you know? Like you can tell it's scripted even though it's not supposed to be scripted. That's how it was like for me reading this book. It was just so awkward. Some of these guys, these fairy guys, these bro and dudes, I felt like I was reading a new adult romance where I'm reading the side characters, the love interest fraternity brothers perspective. It was just honestly really terrible, really horrific, really straight. The POVs from this book, we get like, what, 3 to 5 main POVs. One of them does include Bryce, the main character, but all the others, all guys, all straight, all male, all very hetero. It was just honestly so repetitive to read. Because each of these POVs, what they all have in common is that when they find a female, it's like, the word female and male, I'm just honestly so sick of it, so tired of it. Like I was so annoyed at reading this book. I mean, this review is all over the place. I'm not thinking straight even though this book was super straight. Speaking of how straight this book is, literally in the first 100 pages of this book, I kid you not, on literally every single page, Sarah J. Maas has to refer to Hunt and his maleness. How he is so fucking alpha, how he is so strong. The broad, thick column of his stroking throat, the throbbing, wide bowler shoulders, and the thick, meaty ass pecs that he has. I was like, oh my fucking god, kill me, please. This is literally my 13th reason. I get it. We get it. We all fucking get it how big, strong, straight, alpha dog Hunt is, okay? Every single time Bryce has an interaction with this fucking angel, she has to go in depth of how she feels his big, busted, glorious, wide biceps and his like meaty ass pectoral chest. I'm just honestly sick of it. Sick of it, I tell you. You know, come to think of it, I don't think I've ever read a book where so many of the adult characters are giggling, groaning, smirking, yearning, purring, and hissing at each other. It was... like overall, bottom line, it was a lot to take, okay? 500 pages of this book, all just pining after each other. All the angst, all the horniness, like literally nothing happened. Majority of this book was like detective work. We're following Bryce, who is basically caught up in like another political war and how she's doing detective work trying to find this missing person for literally 600 pages or so. And let me tell you, there's a twist that later occurs in this book that basically devoids all the amount of searching, all the amount of reading that I had to fucking do. That just proves everything pointless. That whole plot, non-existent. It was literally for all these characters to experience some character growth and development with each other. I could honestly give a fuck and could care less. Also, what I noticed is that there is a certain formula when it comes to Sarah J. Maas's books now. It was honestly kind of predictable as to know what was going to happen in like the last 30 to 50 pages. If you have read her other book series, she kind of follows the same formulaic structure that the other series have, you know, following like a plot twist and all that. There isn't really any high stakes regarding certain characters because most of these main characters, you already know, she's never going to kill them off. Instead, she's going to give every single character a mate. You get a mate. You get a mate. You get a mate. Everyone has a mate. I want a mate. Do I have one? No, that's besides the point. Everything I'm trying to say is that it's pretty much the basic formulaic structure that she'll follow through with the majority of her books. So you kind of know where it's going to go. Regarding the plot twist, the last 10 pages or so at the end of this book, people are like,
oh my god, don't read the last page or so. You'll never expect what's to happen.
You know, I wasn't spoiled at all for anything in this book. But reading all about the hype on Twitter and just seeing all like the expressions and the shocked reactions, I sort of can figure out what was going to happen. You can sort of figure out for yourself, right? I mean, at this point, what is she going to do, right? You kind of can figure out where she's going to go with this. So there is this one scene in here that I found so laughable and ridiculous. It was a literal walking red flag. At one point in the book, Hunt gets super angry. Like, this boy is roided on steroids. He's fucking pissed at the world, you know, for hurting his female mates, okay? And so Bryce, to sort of relieve him of this anger, she looks at him and she's like, yo, you angry big boy. Yeah, you big boy, you thick boy, come with me. And they go fuck in a gazebo to relieve him of this anger that he has. And I kid you not, he lights up like an electric stove, pulses out electricity everywhere. And of course, Bryce herself, strongest #1 pussy on the entire planet, takes it all in, and it turns out it doesn't even hurt her. In fact, it turns her on, and zip zap, they come, and everything is fine. It's fucking ridiculous. All I have to say. Bottom line, the absolute horniest couple on the fucking planet I've ever read. Almost every single conversation that they have with each other involves scenting, licking, purring, touching, squeezing, pinching, grabbing, smelling. It was just honestly a whole ordeal that my gay ass was just like, panicking, okay? And so there you go, you have House of Sky and Breath, where everyone is perfect and big, bouncy, perky, muscular in every way. If you're hetero, straight, and white and you're here for a good time, then pick this book up and you'll love it. Will I ever read another Sarah J Maas book again? Honestly, it remains to be seen at this point, who knows? But all I can say is that this was absolutely one of the worst books ever read from Sarah J Maas, and I would have given this book 2 stars if it weren't for the ending. And so 3 out of 5 it is. There you have it. Those are all the books I've recently read. Please let me know down in the comments below if you have read any of these books, and if so, what did you guys think? Especially for House of Sky and Breath, because I'm very curious to know what your thoughts are. Alright, well, this has been fun. This has been it. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and I will see you all soon with a new video. That feeling is pretty much on par. That feeling is just pretty much on par. That feeling is pretty much on par. And how that all comes to play, including the magic, and how all that comes to play, oh my god, I can't fucking speak. It's not the same. Figuring out if they want to figuring out if they want to. I felt like I was reading a POV from a new adult romance where the fraternity brothers, I felt like I was reading a POV from like a new adult romance where I'm reading the POV, where I'm reading the point of view of the character, where I'm reading from perspective, where I'm reading from the perspective of the love interest rival fraternity house, you know, where I'm reading the side character, where I'm reading the perspective of the love interests. Where I'm reading from perspective of the love interest, like fraternity brothers, where I'm reading the love interest, where I'm reading the side characters, the